Arnott, you have 4 minutes on behalf of EFDD.
I must admit, Madam President, that I feel a certain irony about tonight's debate as a British MEP speaking to a British Commissioner in the European Parliament 44 days before Brexit about security threats affecting the UK. But post-Brexit, neighbourly cooperation remains important. We know that the Chinese government is particularly sensitive about suggestions that there could be any security risks regarding the introduction of 5G technology. And indeed, they even went so far as to take out a full-page advertisement in the Daily Telegraph to attempt to assuage those concerns. And perhaps one of the biggest difficulties for me, or indeed for anyone watching this debate, is to assess the nature of evidence which isn't in the public domain. For example, the director of the FBI claims that Huawei's smartphones can conduct undetected espionage and maliciously modify or steal information. But to what extent this can be done, what the hard evidence is, remains something of a mystery. Likewise, the arrest of Meng Wanzhou in Canada at the request of the American government raises concerns. And if it were just the United States, then it would be tempting to impute an ulterior motive, to suggest that it could be simply, I don't know, a US response to a free market challenge to the US's decades of tech dominance. But it's not just the USA. There are concerns from Australia, from Japan, from a number of other European nations closer to home. The British Defence Secretary, Gavin Williamson, has said that he has very deep concerns about Chinese involvement in 5G networks. And if there is a risk, then it must be a very big one. Why? Because every government has an interest in raising billions through 5G auctions. And the Chinese companies are bound to be leading competitors in those auctions. And it's a big risk for another reason, because security matters. Because ultimately, it's a matter of national protection, national defence, national sovereignty. A response to this kind of situation demands the careful consideration of all the evidence. And I believe that the UK's response needs to be dependent on three fundamental questions. Firstly, what is the level of risk of backdoor routes being installed, potentially at the direction of the Chinese government, which would enable industrial espionage to take place? Secondly, what is the level of risk that the Chinese government could mandate the disclosure of information held by Chinese tech companies in the UK, potentially even putting Chinese citizens at risk? Thirdly, to what extent will countries become over-reliant upon the 5G network so that, bluntly, if we find out later that we've made a mistake, it's difficult to correct it? Now, any response at all bears the danger of being overly cautious, overly protectionist, to the extent that we ultimately find ourselves excluding technology from overseas. But that has to be balanced against broader security questions. And to me, the question of risk management is essentially very similar to the question of the precautionary principle. What is the level of evidence needed to act? I don't see this as a question of proof beyond reasonable doubt. Maybe not a question of proof at all, but a question of protection. If we have a lack of absolute scientific certainty, on which side should we bear the risk? And it's a philosophical question as much as a practical one. But I believe that to make practical judgments, we do need a little bit better information as to the level and nature of the risk.